This is a beginner Blender Python tutorial where we'll be learning how to read and write JSON files. Hey, I'm Victor Stepanoff. I'll be guiding you through this beginner Blender Python tutorial. Today we're going to be creating JSON files and reading them back in with a Python script. We're going to be saving the verts and faces of a given mesh, putting all that data into a JSON file, then taking that JSON file and reading it back and creating that mesh based on the data we've read. And if you stick around at the end of this video, I'll show you an exercise to solidify the knowledge you gained. Let's get started. The very first thing that we want to do is we want to head on over to the scripting workspace. I'm going to scroll right here and then click scripting and then hit new right here to create a new script. First of all, let's think through the steps that we need to take to achieve our goal. First, we need to clear the scene from anything that is currently in the scene. Each time we run the script, we want to start with a blank scene. Next, we want to add a mesh that we want to extract the vertices from and the faces. After that's done, we'll be extracting the vertices and faces and putting that into something that we can store. After that's done, we're going to take that data and put it into a JSON file. Finally, we will be able to read that data from the JSON file and then create the mesh based on that data. I'm going to write my comments right here in the script. Here are the comments. It might look a lot, but we'll go through each one of these step by step. At the very top, we as usually extend Python with some functionality. These extensions are just like Blender add-ons. Python has extensions of its own called modules, and the primary module that we always start off on any Blender Python script is BPY, and let's do that import right away. I'll be filling out the rest of the imports as we need them. So the very first thing that we want to do is we want to delete everything from the scene, and I'm going to actually create a separate function here right away, and we'll start using it right away. Here's the function. I called it delete all objects. I gave it a documentation string so people would know what this is doing. Then I'm just making sure that we're not in edit mode because we're going to be working with our mesh in edit mode, and sometimes if there's an error during the script execution, we might be still in edit mode. And next time when we run our script, it's going to produce an error saying that we can't really select everything and delete all the objects in the scene in edit mode, right? We need to make sure that we're in object mode and then be able to select everything and delete. And that's what we do next, is we select every object in the scene and then delete everything that was selected in the scene. Note that this is not a comprehensive clear scene function, meaning that if our script is modifying collections or creating new materials or geometry nodes, we won't be able to clean all the data with this simple script. I have a separate function that allows me to do that. While we have it here, let's go ahead and put the function call. So right here, we're defining it. Nothing will happen. Let me actually show you. So the only thing that is going on in the script is an import of BPY and a definition of a function. Nothing is actually calling this function. So if I run this script right here by hitting the run button, nothing actually happens in the script. And now I'll add a function call right here that will execute the contents of this function. And as soon as I hit the run, the camera, cube, and light are going to disappear from the scene. And as you can see, nothing is left in the scene. This is exactly what we wanted. So each time, let's say I'll add a mesh, and I'll move it over here and then run the script. So each time, whatever is in the scene is going to get deleted. And that's basically it. Next, we want to add the mesh into the scene that we'll be saving into the JSON file. I'm going to go into the 3D viewport right here, hover over it and hit Shift A, and then add mesh and then cube. At the bottom right here in the info panel, I'm just going to go ahead and copy the code that will allow us to create this cube mesh. And I'm going to copy it and add it right here. This command has a number of arguments right here. I'm going to just delete them. We're going to be using the default values of all of these arguments, so we really don't need them. Also, I need to create a variable that will allow us to reference this mesh that we've created. Like so, I'm calling this variable mesh object, and whatever is the currently active object. So from the context, whatever is the active object is going to be referenced here. All right, let's go ahead and run the script. I'm just going to move it here, making sure that again everything is getting deleted and we have a reference. Of course, you can't really see this reference in any way in the 3D viewport, but just believe me that we have a reference now. Next, we will need to extract the vertices that make up each face and the coordinates of these verts. I'm gonna add some comments right here to show like what exactly we need to do, because this is a bit abstract. Okay, let's take a closer look what I'm doing here. First, I need to get into edit mode to be able to create a B mesh, which in turn will allow us to get the data for the verts and the faces, which we need to extract. Then we're going to extract the verts that make up each face. We're going to loop over each face and take a look at the verts property, and that's going to be a list of verts that will make up that given face. And then we'll need to loop through all the verts and get their coordinates. And finally, we want to make sure that we're back in object mode before we finish our script. Let's enter edit mode first. I'm using a similar command like I'm doing here. I'm setting the mode to edit mode in this particular case. And as soon as I run the script, you'll notice that the cube will be in edit mode. So let's run the script, and you can see the cube is now in edit mode. And we want to make sure that we're back into object mode as soon as we finish up whatever we're doing right here. So if I run this code again, it's gonna basically you won't even notice that the cube was in edit mode, like so. Okay, that should allow us at this point in the script to create a B mesh for the mesh object that we are working with, like so. Again, this right here is another module that we need to import. I'm going to go to the very top right here, and under this I'm going to import the BMesh module. Now this extends Python's functionality to be able to work with Blender meshes, and this is exactly what we're accessing here. We're accessing the BMesh module, and we're turning the data of this given mesh. We're accessing the data and creating the B mesh from that data. So we're creating a separate object, and that's going to be the B mesh object. Now we need to extract the vert indices that make up each face. What does this really mean? I'll need to turn on something in the preferences. So preferences, interface, and then developer extras. And I'm going to hit Control Space to get a full screen view. Enter edit mode by hitting tab. And then I'm going to enable under developer right here. So this won't be enabled unless you click that developer extras in the preferences. This will show the indices of each one of the verts that we have here. So if you click on faces, for example, so the top face has an index of 5. So this top face consists of vert 7, 3, 1, and 5. So we need that data to then reassemble this mesh. We're extracting these indices, and we need to loop over each one of these faces of this mesh and then access the verts properties of this face. Let me show you how that looks. So this is how it looks. This is going to be a list of lists. Don't worry, it's not that complicated as it might sound. For each face, so each face has a list of verts, right? And we need to collect all the faces. All the faces is already a list. And for each face, there's a list of verts, right? So it's a list of lists. So this is the outer list that contains the list of all the verts for each face. Now we loop through all the faces of a given mesh, right? So we created this B mesh here. We're looping through the faces, and each face is going to be assigned to this right here on each iteration of the for loop. And for each iteration of the for loop, we're going to create a new list right here, so face verts, and we're going to loop over the verts. So the face right here has a property called verts, and that contains a reference to all the verts for that face, right? And all the verts is going to go through here, right? So we're continuing to loop through that. And then we're adding the index of each one of those verts, right? And as soon as we were done with this for loop, as we gathered all the indices of each one of those verts, we take this list that we created and we append it to this bigger list, right? Let's actually print this out like so, and let's rerun the script. And to open the system console, I'm going to go under Window and toggle System Console. And if you're running Mac or Linux, unfortunately, you won't have this button right here in the UI. I have a separate video for Mac and Linux users, so you'll need to do some extra steps, unfortunately, to get this console. And this is what I'm getting when I'm printing out the list of lists. So you can see this is a big list, and each one of the elements of the list is another list, right? And these are the indices of each vert that make up a given face. All right, and actually I can make it look a bit better by using a module called PrettyPrint. And I need to first import it. So I'm going to import it right here. The module is called PrettyPrint, but for a shorter version, the module is called pprint. So I'm going to import it here, right? Again, extending Python. And instead of using this print, I'm going to say pprint.pprint. So inside of the module pprint, there's going to be a function called pprint. And this will allow us to have a more readable way to look at this list of lists. Let's run that and check it out. And here is what I got. You can see that this is the original way. It was kind of, as you extend and add more stuff to this list of lists, is going to get really unreadable. And this puts every single list on each separate line. It really makes it easier to read this type of output. All right, so that's PrettyPrint. And next, we'll need to extract the vert coordinates. All right, but actually before I start extracting the vert coordinates, I'm going to do a slight trick here. And here's the trick. If you don't fully understand this, it's okay, don't worry. Maybe ask in the comments and I can do a separate video and explain what this means, but I'll try to do it now. We have a number of verts that a mesh has, right? And I'm getting the length, the vert count for a given mesh right here. And then I'm doing this fancy thing, which is I'm taking the number of verts and I'm actually creating a list that will be length of the vert count, but it's going to be all filled out with none. And none is like nothing is there. And why do I want to do this? Well, in just a second, I'll be looping through all the verts of our mesh. And I want to make sure to use the index of each vert and use that index to place the coordinates right into the right index. This is going to be probably easier to show than to tell about. Actually, let me print this out and I'll show you how this looks. So again, let's run this. And you can see that this is none, 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 right? This is the number of verts that we have in our mesh. And it created a list that's of that length and it just filled it out with none. And again, if I wanted this to be like 0, for example, this will be a list, again, the same length, but it'll contain zeros. So you can see 0, 0, 0, 0, right? You can really put anything you want there. I'm gonna switch back to none, just in case. All right, so let's create the for loop itself. So here it is, and let's now print it right here. So again, we're using the B mesh. Again, we're looping through that, through each vert, and then we're using the vert index and getting the vert coordinate. Right here, this right here is why I did this. I'm not 100% sure that this guarantees it's going to spit out the verts exactly in the order of like from 0 to the length of the verts, right? And so to use this right here, instead of like appending, right, I'm just filling out and making sure that we have the list in a particular length. Let's run the script. And here we go. You can see that we have these are the coordinates for each one of the verts, right? And notice that I also wrapped the coordinates. So CO stands for coordinate for this given vert. And if I didn't do this list right here, run that again, it actually gives me this vector that is all great, but it's going to get in the way of storing this in a JSON file, and you'll see that in just a minute. Let me undo that. Let's run the script. All right, yeah, so this is exactly what we're expecting. First, we're defining the faces, like what vert makes up what face. And again, each one of these indices right here is the index in this list. So 0 is the first one right here, 1 is the second, right? It all maps together and works nicely. All right, so now that we have extracted all this data, let's create a dictionary that we'll be putting into a JSON file. And a dictionary is not a random choice. Dictionaries map really well to JSON files, and that's why we're using a dictionary. Let's create one right here. And here's the dictionary I've added right after exiting out of the edit mode. It doesn't really matter, I could have put it here, but I'll just do that. So it's going to be data, and I added an extra property here, or key is the object name. We'll be using that as well when we're going to be importing this data. We got the face verts and the vert coordinates. Let's print the resulting dictionary. So instead of this, it's going to be data, and let's run our script. And now you can see we have the face verts, right? We have the object name, and we got the coordinates for each one of the verts. All right, now we're ready to save this data into a JSON file. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a path for the file that we'll be saving into. Let's do that now. And here's the path. Let's print it out. And actually, before I do that, I need to not forget to import pathlib. It's another module that we're using that we need to import right here. So pathlib. So now that's ready and extended. And in pathlib allows us to get the path of for the home folder, and this home folder works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. It's great. And inside of that home folder, you should create a temp folder if you haven't already. I already have mine set up, and this is going to be the name of the JSON file that we're going to be saving into. And let's take a look at what this looks on my machine. And this is what the file path is on Windows, and it's going to be something similar on Mac and Linux. All right, so now that we have our path, we can go ahead and create our JSON file. So I've deleted that print statement, but I added this code right here. Let's take a look step by step what it does. This right here, this command, this opens this path right here for writing, so you can read and write from files. We're going to be writing into this file. This is a reference to this open file. And this with statement right here, the thing is that when you're working with files, you need to open and close them when you're done. Right? It's very important to make sure that you close files after you're done. And this allows us to not only open, but as soon as the code execution kind of exits this code block right here, right? It continues to run other code in the script. It's going to automatically close the file we opened. So that's the short version of what this does. That's done. Now we're going to access the JSON module, and before we access that, we need to import it at the very top of our script. So import JSON, and we're accessing that module, and we're using the dump s function. And dump s function dumps the dictionary, which is our data right here. Remember, we defined the dictionary here. It dumps it into some text. So now this is an object, right? The Python object. But now this is a piece of text. So just like this, right? All that data right here became a piece of text. Even the numbers for the verts and the indices and so on. This is This is to make sure that we have indented the text. You'll see I'll toggle this on and off to show you the difference. And we take the reference from the object and we write that text into that file. Okay, now we're ready to actually write out the JSON file. Let's go ahead and do that. And I've executed this script. And now if I go into my temp folder in my home folder, I should find a mesh JSON. And here's the mesh JSON. I'm going to go ahead and open it. And here's the contents. I've opened it in VS Code. And you can see that we have the name, the object name, the faces, the vert faces, the vert coordinates, right? It's exactly the same thing that we're printing out into our system console, right? This is great. And now this is ready. We can, oh, actually, you know what? Before we continue, let me show you what happens if I don't indent. So the indent means that, see these 4 spaces right here, right? That's the 4 value that I set when I was creating this text. So if I go back and I delete this, it's just going to put all that data in a single line. Unreadable, but hey, it works. Let's go ahead and rerun that. And let's open again that mesh JSON. And look at that. It's the same data, but it looks horrible. And we, of course, don't want that. We want to have it nicely indented. So let's undo that. All right. Okay, before we create the script that will be reading or loading the data and creating a mesh from that data, I want to move all this code into separate functions so it's nicely organized. So I selected everything by holding Shift and clicking, and I'm going to create a main function. So that's the main function, and it's all defined. Let's make sure we're calling it here. Let's extract the code that extracts the mesh, the verts and faces data. All this code right here. Extract that into a new function. I'm going to return right away data, and I'm going to define that new function. So, and I'm going to create, instead of this comment, I'm going to make it a documentation string. All right, so that's get mesh data, and let's go ahead and put it back right here. Object, and so that returns data, right? So I will go in here, and let's actually extract this into a function as well, like so. So get path to mesh data. So that's going to be used right here. Now let's extract this part right here that actually saves our data into another function, like so. So it's saved data. We're passing in the data and then writing it out. Passing in this data, and let's actually wrap this into another function. And I'm going to name it create JSON data from mesh. We're going to create an opposite, create mesh from JSON data, the opposite of this. Now we're going to call it right here. Okay, and that should allow us to go ahead and run it. Hopefully I didn't make any typos. And of course, all this code, it will be available in the description, so don't worry about that. If you're getting lost here, let's go ahead and let me just move this, making sure that this runs. And yeah, it looks like it's running. And let's check out the mesh. And it looks like we're still writing out the data correctly. Okay, that's good. Okay, and now we're ready to create the functions that will read in that JSON data and create a mesh out of that data. Okay, now it's time to create our next function for creating a mesh from the JSON data. So I'm just going to move that code right here, like so. I'm going to call it right here. Again, I'm going to be just, instead of toggling this on and off, I'll be just commenting out. So remember, a comment makes Python ignore this line, so it's not going to be called. Now we're just going to call this function right here. And the very first thing that we need to do is we need to read in the mesh data. And let's create a separate function for that. Okay, so here is the function for loading the data. It's called load data. Remember, we're using that function that we created right here to get the path to our mesh data. So that's the path. And now remember, we are opening a file for writing. This is R means reading. So we're reading this file. So it's this is the reference that's going to be referencing our open file. And we're just going to read all the text that this file has inside of it and place all that text into text variable. And again, we're accessing the JSON module. And now instead of dumping, remember we were dumping the string, the dictionary into text, and now we're doing the opposite. We're going to be loading the text and creating a dictionary from it. Now, usually I would check if this file exists on disk before doing this operation, because if we don't, it's going to cause an error. But I want to keep this script as simple as possible. It's already getting pretty complex already, unfortunately, but I would check if this file exists. I'll just skip that for now, and now we can call this function here like so. And let's actually make sure that this runs, and I'm gonna pretty print it. So again, I'm using pretty print and printing out the data that we loaded. Remember, we're deleting everything from the scene, and actually nothing's going to appear in the scene because this is the code that we're running. So we're only reading from our mesh JSON and printing it out. Let's do that. Again, nothing in the scene, but we can take a look at our system console. That will contain all the data. You can see that we have loaded this data right here. And actually, you know what? It kind of looks all the same. Let me add some printing here. I'm going to print this string right here, and I'm going to actually add a couple of new lines so we can really see the result. Okay, let's run that again. And you can see right there, we're printing out that piece of text and then printing out the data that we loaded. So this is just to kind of prove that it's not, I'm not showing you the same exact output over and over again, right? All right, so that is good. We don't need this. Next, to save time, I'm just gonna copy the code that I have done in another tutorial where we created a cube mesh based off of verts and faces. And I'm just gonna paste in the code right here. I'll just provide a link in the description under create mesh code. And I'll just paste that in right now. So here is the code. All right, so we don't need these verts. Don't need these faces. We're going to be getting that from our data that we loaded. Keep edges as that. Okay, let's do this. So the verts are, we're going to just take the vert coordinates and the faces that, and the verts that make up each face, we're going to just get it right straight from the data. Exactly the same format. And for this, I'll need to extract the name of the object. So that's the name of the object. We're extracting that from the data. I'm creating a new string, formatting it using this variable and calling it whatever the object name is, and then data. And then instead of this, so this is the name of the final object in our scene. It's just going to be object name. This looks like it's going to work. All right, let's make sure that it does. Nope, there is an issue. Oh, and actually I forgot, it's not mesh, it's just data right here. So let's run that. And okay, here we go. Now we have our cube getting created. And you know what? I want to move this into a separate function. Create a new function here. So it's going to be create mesh from data, and we're passing in the data like so. And let's call this function right here. All right, and actually you can see that we have the cube data up here, so this is getting defined right here. So we can, I'll just show you that it's this code that's getting executed. Again, I'm going to move. So run the script. So the cube is added, and we have the cube data. So exactly this code is getting executed. Awesome. Now we're reading the mesh data and creating a mesh from the data we have in our JSON file. To great. All right. And if you're learning something new and enjoying this tutorial, make sure to hit the like button so I can understand to make more videos like this. Let's make sure that this works for any mesh. Let's add an icosphere, for example. This is an icosphere. Let's get the code for the icosphere. And instead of the cube mesh right here, I'm going to add an icosphere. So this is create JSON data from mesh in that function. I'm deleting all the parameters, right? So using all the default parameters. So this is going to create the icosphere and save the icosphere mesh data into a JSON file. Now it's going to be the same JSON file. And first we need to run this. So we're going to encode the data, right? So we can move it, show you that it actually changes. Yeah, so we created a new icosphere, and let's check out the mesh JSON file. Okay, and here is the mesh JSON file. See, we have the icosphere name. Now each one of the faces is actually consists of 3 verts, right? So it's 3 verts, and it does look like it's doing its thing. And here are the verts. So they have some kind of value, right? Looks correct just from first glance. This is great. And now we got that coded. Let's make sure that, let's move this. So now we're getting the data from the JSON file, right? And again, if we look right here, we have in the outliner, we have icosphere 02, and this should have data if it's imported correctly from our script. So let's do that. Okay, something is created, and look at that icosphere data. All right, it works. Okay, and as promised for your exercise, I want you to also add the location property of our object. So not only you're going to save the name, the verts, and the faces of this mesh, I also want you to store the location. Update the script to store the location and then load the location. This way you can add another field that you want to store. All right, go ahead and pause the video now and try this on your own, and then come back and check out how I would have done it. Okay, the very first thing that I need to do in the script is actually change the location of the object that we're creating. So this is going to be right here. Again, we're constantly removing the object from the scene, and if we just save the current setup, it's going to be right in the middle. You can't really tell if the script is working or not. Right, so we need to first change the location like so. So we're setting the location to 555, and let's set this to coding. I run the script, and you can see that the icosphere is right here. And now look, if I comment this and then I run the code that's going to be loading, the icosphere is going to appear right here, because we haven't really created the ability to save that data. So let's go back and let's make sure that we save the location. And to do that, we're going to have to add another field to our data dictionary right here, like so. So I'm adding the object location, and I'm using the mesh object reference again as the same thing that we used for the name, getting the location. And notice I'm transferring this into a list. Remember that all the locations, coordinates, and everything are wrapped in a special object called vector, but we want just the coordinates, and there's a nice conversion from vectors to a list, which just is a bunch of numbers, which is X, Y, and Z. And this is exactly what's going on here. And let's go ahead and run the script and check out the resulting JSON file. Okay, and here is the resulting JSON file. You can see that object location is encoded and it has 555. And now all that's left is actually read this data and apply it to our object when we're reading the JSON data. And that's going to be somewhere around here. All right. So after we create the object with all that data, we can apply the location like so. So we're using the new object that we created, setting the location to whatever data we stored in the JSON file. So now let's make sure that this works. And oh, sorry, I forgot to update this. So that was encoding, and now we're going to decode the JSON file, run it, and look at that. And you can see that we have the icosphere data exactly set right here. All right, and I hope you enjoyed that. If there are some things not clear about this script, go ahead and ask your questions in the comments so I can understand what to maybe explain better and maybe create a separate video on a particular subject. After doing this tutorial, I feel like this is a more upper beginner tutorial, right? There's a lot of things going on here. Don't worry if you didn't get everything from the very first go. For more tutorials like this, make sure to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.